right, and we are live. Making sure it's on that time after last kerfuffle that I tried to do a solo thing like this. So yeah, this is kind of a belated reflections, I guess you could say. Wasn't really sure what to do for the next solo podcast outside of Swamp Creatures. So after a conversation with if you're not familiar, I'm also on a show called The Swamp Creatures, and one of our previous guests was Reed Coverdale, and no one, someone might have noticed that I was wearing a Jacob Hornberger shirt the whole time. Reed was one of the people who was very outspoken in criticizing the Hornberger campaign, and I like Reed a lot. He's definitely a good guy. But, I didn't really get a chance to bring it up because, honestly, we were talking about everything else. We were having such a good time. Just didn't really bring up the Hornberger campaign. But after the podcast, we had an interesting discussion, just kind of talking out our different views and everything, if you will. And I thought it was a really good discussion. And, frankly, I kind of had to meditate on some stuff. So I thought, maybe it would be a good idea to just come out here and kind of unpack some of this stuff, I guess you could say. So, if you don't know what I'm talking about, Jacob Hornberger ran for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination in 2020. And for a good time there, he was the front runner. He was kicking ass and taking names, for lack of a better way of putting it. And it's really crazy looking back, so I'm going to go back to the beginning here. And basically, I know, me knowing Hornberger goes before this. I know him from my days in Young Americans for Liberty. From one of the speaking engagements that Hornberger spoke at. And me, the young anarchist, kind of challenged him a little bit as a minarchist in regards to his views, but I ended up developing a respect for the guy. And, come 2020, I was not very enthused with the Libertarian Party at all, I'll be honest. Every candidate running, I either wasn't enthusiastic about, didn't see any really hope in the future of, or just did not like them. But when I heard a rumor from someone behind the scenes that Hornberger was thinking about running, when I saw him at the 2019 Florida convention, because he did attend, it was when he was kind of feeling out the waters of possibly running. I went up to him and I told him, I've heard the rumors, and if you decide to run, let me know, because I would love to campaign for you and do everything I can. And that's kind of where it began. Eventually I got in touch with Michael Heiss and all the different people working on it. Really, if it wasn't for me doing the Hornberger campaign, I never would have joined the Mises Caucus and become one of the state organizers here in Florida, of which I am very proud of the work that we've done. So, in a way, this was all a precursor to what we ended up doing here in this state. So, I ended up joining up, and the two things that I ended up really helping them out with was social media and the podcast that we did with Jacob, the live streams, basically. What we would do is, I want to say it was every Tuesday or Thursday, I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically we would get on at night and do a live show, kind of like I'm doing right now, except, I think it was StreamYard, I think was the thing that we used. Basically a lot like this. So we'd see people's questions as they would come in, and we would ask those questions. Obviously, we get some ridiculous stuff too, but honestly, we focused on the stuff that really seemed like this is what people need to hear. Like, these are obviously pressing questions. This is why people are asking this. A little bit of my old journalism came in doing that. But we had a good time. Me, Eric Sawyer, Chaz Sanders. Major shout out to those guys. I would love to get the Revolution Report going again. I don't know if it ever will because of everyone's personal things they have going on. But, major props to those guys. Like, they really, of course Jacob too, but the three of us together, we we really went for a long time, and then afterwards we went one or two more podcasts, and then we all just got so tied up either in life or doing Mises Caucus stuff in our states that we kind of, things became hard to keep together. But silver lining, I guess you could say, me eventually getting involved in the Swamp Creatures came because of that. But we really did a lot. But I wonder the reactions of some of the people who might have seen those streams, because I know some pretty high-profile people were watching them. I mean, a lot of the criticisms that people had of Jacob, I feel like they had to be watching those, or at least have seen things. I don't know. I wonder. But that's basically how it all began. And as things progressed, we were doing really good, because there were everyone who was working on that campaign that I can think of, some of which ended up becoming LP at large. A lot of those people really saw this as an opportunity to bring the Ron Paul revolution back in a year when the world ended up needing it more than anything. And man, if a lot of us could have seen what 2020 would have turned into, man, I don't know what we would have, what could have been different. Hell if I know. But this is kind of going back to the conversation I had with Reed Coverdale, and a conversation I've had with others as well. A lot of us thought we were going to bring the Ron Paul revolution home, and to some degree, I do think that is true. To another degree, I think we got to view it as like something new entirely. Jacob wasn't Ron. Dave Smith, even though I'm all for Smith for president, get the shirt at the Libertarian Frontier. Even though there was, how could I put this? I don't know. It was definitely a really interesting time to be running that campaign. But it's like, just looking back, it's a very interesting thing to just kind of meditate on. Anyways, I'll dive into getting here a little bit more chronological then. We started doing those live streams with Jacob. I don't want to get sidetracked too much. But as things went along, we were, getting people to really get caught up in this idea of Revolution 2.0. And to some degree, that's still something I believe in. But, the way I look at it after all that, the revolution is forever, It's not something that's going to have some grand victory. It's something that you do in your own life with your own two hands. And I do really believe that, given the way things turned out and the way things have gone over the past year. Anyways, I'm just getting sidetracked and stuff now. But anyways, we started steamrolling a lot of conventions. It seemed like we would win about 2 or 3, and then someone else would win another convention. That person would maybe have a surge online for like a week or two, and then eventually just kind of fade away because they couldn't keep that momentum going. And this isn't even me just trying to say anything mean, but that's just the opposite. That just seemed to be the trend of what happened. Like, you would have Jim Gray maybe do good one week, have a little bit of momentum for about a week or two, and then just eventually just fizzle out. I think Larry Sharp kind of kept him in longer than he could have been capable of. But it's interesting to look at all the different chess pieces that were on the table looking back. But, we were doing really good. I mean, even here in Florida, Joe Jorgensen lost to Noda. I'm not even kidding. Go look that up. Here in the primaries here in Florida, Joe Jorgensen lost to none of the above. And, we dominated here in Florida. We dominated just everywhere. And what went wrong? That's the thing that I really look back on. And most importantly, what went right. Because there were moments where I legitimately thought, like, Jacob and everyone on the campaign did everything so flawlessly that we did, to some degree, capture the psychology of that Ron Paul revolution, which I think is more so the case than anything else. You got to capture the psychology and get that that sort of psychological perspective into the modern world, into the modern zeitgeist. So, I don't know. One thing that comes to mind was the Mark Whitney incident here in Florida, where independent Mark Whitney joined the race and basically made an ass of himself at the convention. And that's not even me, trying to be mean, but that's literally what happened. He just kind of made a public display, cursing out the audience, cursing out the Florida delegation. I think he also lost a nota too, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I could be wrong though. He might have actually gotten like one or two from, I'm sure, his campaign people. But that whole thing, I look back at that, and there was something Ron Paul-esque in the psychology of when that happened. I was sitting in the audience. I was actually the timekeeper at that debate. And, I was watching that thing, and I'm going to enforce those things. Like, I'm not showing any leeway towards anyone I might campaign for or not like. In some ways, I had heard that Whitney had something up his sleeve from some of his campaign people, and then what it ended up being was just they couldn't find anything with Jacob not winning anything in court, to which Hornberger was like, well, yeah, maybe it's not familiar with the, like this X, Y, and Z, which were actually very great examples, if I remember properly. I believe it had to do with a drug charge. Props to Jacob. Once again, like in the world of politics, it's whatever. The guy's legacy, I think, is greater. But in that moment, there was something Ron Paul-esque about that, where you had this rhino come after him. I don't mean rhino in the one way. I mean as in a metaphorical, rhino. And basically, Hornberger took it like a champ, which is kind of what Ron Paul did when you look back at the Giuliani moment. Giuliani really tried to press these buttons to get something out of it, but instead, Ron Paul was able to basically unleash that sort of intellectual badass and make it into a spectacle, which is what I think Hornberger kind of did in that moment too. He took advantage of the moment to remind people that he has been fighting for libertarian ideas for as long as he has. So that was definitely something that went right. I have a little bit of notes here to kind of keep it up, but things were going really well. The only things that I knew, there were people who talked behind the scenes. Those like more high-profile folks, and I'll tell you, that was interesting, because we would hear things, we're just going to call this the war room. There was like a war room of people who would talk about all this stuff. And it was interesting hearing some of the things that would come out of that. To some degree, I really think that us on the podcast, we really should have made more of a point or put our foot in the door and be like, hey, we're doing this podcast publicly. Maybe we should be in on these conversations as well, because it was interesting, that's for sure. Like, obviously the war room would consist of everyone you would figure, like Dave Smith and Tom Woods and all those guys. But there were other people in there too. Like, it wasn't just, high-profile people. There was also, campaign manager, Mises Caucus folks, a lot of different people. And we would hear things that, eventually we would implement into the podcast. So with that, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes things that I still wonder about. One person in particular, I remember, ended up quitting on Jacob. There was like this huge spat or some shit. I don't know the details, but basically he ended up leaving and supporting Jorgensen behind the scenes. And it was one of those things, like when I was hearing it, I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. But with that person was really trying to, oh, Joe will listen to us revolution types. And then later on, that same person ended up complaining about how Joe wouldn't listen to them. And I don't know, I respect that person. They're still a friend of mine, but, to some degree, it's like you reap what you sow. I don't know, that's just my feeling on it. Where things really went wrong was when Justin Amash jumped into the race. Like, sure, those were problems before, but nothing that wasn't unsalvageable, nothing which led to, like, total burned bridge, total shit show. But the Amash thing, I think in many ways that threw Hornberger for a loop. Like, he even said that in one of the podcasts that I went back and re-looked at. Like, I'm now fighting for this campaign or something like that, when in many ways he did fall to second place when Amash jumped in. I know anything that I could say criticizing has already been said behind the scenes. But yeah, I think he could have handled Amash a lot better. Like, like I love and respect the guy, but just tactics, art of war. Weak when you're strong, strong when you're weak. Like, he looked very, going on the offensive like that, trying to regain that. I don't know. Like, strong when you're. He definitely made himself kind of look like someone who was weakened, and because of that, it kind of negated any ideas of looking strong. I don't know how else to put it. But just kind of reanalyzing this through the lens of the art of war as well. The whole thing was just a disaster. It was poorly executed, and I think that's really what, like, even Reed said this. Like, this is why I'm talking about this right now, because Reed Coverdale and Dave Smith both kind of talked about this, and I don't know. I'm proud of the campaign, but who knows? The way I look at it, we'll get to that. We'll keep going first. But with Justin Amash, I don't know if it really was exploratory or if he was serious, because he did participate in 2 of the debates. So clearly there was a fair amount of intent. I honestly wonder why he dropped out. He still would have won. He still would have gotten the nomination. No problem at all. Like, I honestly don't think that Jorgensen still would have pulled it out and defeated Justin Amash. That just wasn't going to happen. But, yeah, so the total shit show of the debates happened. And from there, I don't know, it was like a sort of mentality emerged, and once again, just from a strategic standpoint, didn't really hold up. And this is like the worst one, because like this is where I'm gonna have to almost get a little bit brutally honest about things, at least in regards to my own perspective on things. Like, this is kind of where I realized that we're doomed. We're not winning. Like, there's just no way we are defeating this at this point. And that was when you had that final debate with John Stossel. And talk about a mess. I will never forget the question that Jacob was asked there on stage. That being that, what's the free market alternative to the free market answer to environmental issues? Which is an easy question to answer. Like, this is one where things like cryptocurrency and energy web chain are one thing. Also, you have nuclear energy, which is something we would encourage more if there weren't so many laws denying that. There's thorium. Like, there's so many things you could talk about that are groundbreaking and really explain how these new emerging technologies not only are greener, but they give the individual more power, more autonomy. And that governments are trying to clamp down on this, but if we give the individual more of that, that only helps create a better future for everyone. It's a really easy thing to do. And that's just the direction I would go in. There's a lot of other directions you could take that conversation. Instead, he immediately went on the attack of Joe. And that was just any last, holding on to the front. I just saw it evaporate in that instance. I literally, sitting somewhere around here, stood up and just shouted, "What the fuck?" And, Jacob, if you end up watching this, man, I still respect the shit out of you. You're still someone I look up to. But that was just not a good moment. And you know what? Everyone's got them. I've had stupid ideological moments. I guarantee you everyone has had them in the past. Even Ron Paul. I mean, shit. I don't know. Like, but, you know, I don't know about Ron Paul. Libertarian Jesus. I'm just joking. But, you know, that's, you know, I've had my dumb ideological moments. But just from, like, a strategic standpoint and playing what is basically a game of chess in many ways, it just, every one of the moves was bad. And, you know, it wasn't, if you did eventually want to bring these things up, you know, instead of going on the attack with Amash, for example, the one I always think of is like, all right, and thank you, like, just if you were in there. This is just me. I didn't realize I'd be talking so much about crowd psych here, but there's a lot of crowd psych. But basically, you attack the crowd, you make them your enemy. There's no way of doing that. To feed the crowd's delusions and play into things, now that's how you win them over. That's just common crowd psychology a la Gustave Le Bon. And that whole thing was just bad. It didn't really give anything to the crowd. It didn't give them anything to question. It didn't really give them anything to really delve further into. Going on the attack, it just makes them look at you like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? But with that, the best way that, you know, for those who don't remember the Amash one, if I'm not mistaken, it had something to do with his voting on abortion and Iran sanctions. All you had to do was be like, and thank you, Congressman Amash, for being here in this debate. I really want to thank you for being the first libertarian congressman. It really does mean a lot to the party and for the future of this nation. But I gotta say, I'm very concerned about your view about your past voting record on abortion and Iran sanctions. Like, how would you respond to this? You know, just as like a genuine question, because that sort of genuine question gets the common person to think, huh, yeah, that is, you know, what do you have to say about that anyway? Like, you haven't lost me, but, you know, what's your response to that? That's a fair thing. Just common psychology is what that would come down to. Anyway, getting lost talking about the Joe Jorgensen and Amash debates, but it was not the high points, that's for sure. Then there just came the bottle episode that was a convention. So coronavirus eventually happened, and everyone got all paranoid and everything like that. We ended up not having our convention in Austin and moving it to, well, Florida. And the only reason that ended up happening was because the first several days, specifically those, you know, nominating the presidential candidate and the VP, they all happened over Zoom. And I don't know if you are familiar with what a bottle episode is, but if you're not, it's basically an episode of a TV show, a sitcom, or an animated show that takes place entirely in one place and doesn't really leave that one. They're bottled up in some place. That convention might as well have been a bottle episode, because my God, it was fucking horrible. It was just, trying to do any of that over Zoom was just an absolute shit show. I don't care what Nick Sarwark says. I guarantee you he even fucking hated running that thing. Like, we made memes out of his reactions to running a goddamn convention over Zoom. Part of me does wonder if the establishment of the LP really what their game was with all that. Shit, I still stand by voting not to seat people online in Orlando, even though many of my constituents thought otherwise. It's like, come on. I thought the party belonged to those who show up. Anyways, I'm getting into the party politics. But, you know, that whole convention, the thing that sucked the most was, for one, I wonder if Dan Fishman fucked with Hornberger in regards to not sending him the link or whatever. Because there was a whole speaking fiasco that happened, and it seemed too, like, I wonder why, like, you know, you're still mad about stuff that happened in the 2000s, but, you know, this is happening, like, what the fuck? I don't know, that's just my conspiratorial side, but, hell, it worked, so, you know, if you did do it, good for you, like, art of war, sometimes you gotta play dirty, but, I'm just kidding. But, that whole thing. The thing that I think really hurt us the most was not being able to, after someone was to drop out, we didn't really have a means to go try and recruit anyone who might have been campaigning for that person to our cause. And that was a big problem because you had people who were dropping out left and right. In some cases, like Adam Kokesh's people, we didn't really have a good opportunity to reach out to those folks. And the reason why, and this is the problem with the online convention, you're not altogether talking to one another. When you're doing this all online, everyone is just going into their little private chat rooms with one another and just talking to one another the whole time. And I think that really created a problem when it came to that element of, running everything in that way. So, yeah, it was a shit show. I think we won the first round. Maybe, I don't even remember, honestly. Because at that point I was just like, when is this going to end? Eventually Jorgensen just took it because she got the majority, I guess, that was necessary. I think it was the third to last round. It was between us, Vermin Supreme, and Joe Jorgensen. And, Jorgensen ended up taking it. And, it's the campaign we got. That's the thing that makes it so I can't really say that anything bad with the Hornberger campaign. I can't say it was for nothing, because clearly we did remind people of the revolution, that this was once a thing. With what ended up happening with Joe Jorgensen, Spike Combs, to continue the story, the next day, just go to show you, when us Vermin people and Mises people vote together, we got shit done. Or the Rads, whatever they're called. Like that shit was fucking hilarious. There was such this reaction where, Joe, really upsold the shit out of John Mons. She really wanted him to be her VP. I'm willing to bet money that was the case. Oh yeah, Spike Cohen, he's great, he's from my state, but this John Mons guy, this is the guy. There was almost that level of I don't know, that's just the way I read it. Other people have told me they didn't read it that way, but I did. Let's be, just gotta be, real when looking at people's intentions. But we ended up getting Spike the nomination. And there was this weird feeling, because there were talks before about trying to nominate Spike as our VP on the convention floor. Another mistake that I think Jacob made was not nominating a VP, and I just think that's from a public relations standpoint. But I understand the reason he didn't. It's an honorable reason. The problem is, when you're playing the game of politics, you got to think Machiavellian to some degree. But I don't know, it was really cool to see Spike get the nomination for that reason. We had, me and other people had heard rumors of that. We all ended up getting behind it, and it just goes to show you what we're capable of when we meet together. And honestly, Spike was the silver lining to all that. Because that was the problem with the Jorgensen campaign. I watched people in my family get a little bit excited around the convention time because they saw me, online, blah, 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 all this other shit. And they were actually into it, and then it just dropped off. And I don't know why that was. I mean, I don't know if it had to do with her minuscule to non-presence, but at the same time, they're there's a lot of media blackout, but it was how much was done? I don't know. I wasn't on her team. I made the Let Her Speak poster, but that's about it. That was more of an independent thing that was done separate of the campaign. I guess it was completely separate of the campaign itself. But there was this lack of I will give them this. They did have those freaking convoys or whatever it was. But even then, I never saw it. It just didn't really seem to be gripping the culture. And the way the campaign ended up being done, too, between the divisive statements and eventually releasing a list for Supreme Court Justice pick list, which was hilarious because they tried to pander to us Hornberger people and it completely backfired because everyone noticed who one of the several picks down was Alan Dershowitz, and that created a whole stigma around that and everything. Between everything that happened, okay, when the election came, I ended up not voting for Jorgensen. I thought that the LP in many ways needed a wake-up call. Many people disagree with me on that, but it is what it is. I'm here because I believe in my ideas. If you don't earn my vote, just like any other politician, you don't earn it. And that poor performance had me so really just downright ashamed of my party. Like, that's the one silver lining I look at the whole Hornberger thing. Like, if for nothing, one thing I can say for certain was that if Jacob had gotten the nomination, I think to some degree we still would have been proud to be Libertarian. But even then, I wonder about some of the other things. Like, this is going back to Reed's comments about things like Social Security and whatnot. I think corporate welfare is definitely more important, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Especially given the past year with the way seems like the corporations are fucking ruling us at this point. But I don't know. That's basically what ended up happening. The campaign was pretty well off for the most part, minus a few bumps in the road until things got really rocky. And yeah, there's nothing I can say that hasn't already been said by many other people, including Dave and Reed, because they both seemed to talk a lot about it, and I never got to speak with Dave, and I didn't even know Reed until recently, until until he was on Swamp Creatures. But after seeing their points to some degree, it's one of those things where it's like, I still wholeheartedly believe that we would have done a better job than Jorgensen. And I only mean that because real talk, they weren't ready to run a campaign. Like, you look at everything that I saw, at least heard from sources, and there were all these descriptions of things, and it was almost like they didn't expect to win, but they ended up winning, and now they're just working with what they've been handed. But in many ways, I think what they expected was to eventually have to drop out in a certain round and then endorse someone else, probably Justin Amash, if things had gone the way that kind of contingent seemed to be going. I mean, the way things ended up going, the lockdowns, the riots, you would think they would have said more. That's why I think Spike is really the silver lining. He really did establish himself in a true leadership role, which good on him. And I think that was probably the best thing to come out of it. But yeah, as far as the podcast went, I mean, that's where we're at now. I'm doing stuff solo every now and then just because I'm bored, or with my buddies over on Swamp Creatures. But okay. So what was it all for? That's kind of where I end up, where it's like I agree with Dave and Reed, but there's kind of like this part of me that has to believe this had to have been for something. And I guess the silver lining is what we have seen with a lot of the people who worked on that campaign going on and doing things in their home states. So once again, props to Eric Sawyer and everyone else, Chaz, Eric, they're both great, but even everyone else who worked on that campaign and just went on and did great stuff. So I don't know. Good things definitely came out of it. Do I think things could have been done better? Yeah. Do I think Jacob Hornberger still should be remembered as one of the greatest people in regards to this caucus? Hell yeah. just to look at how far he came from jumping in as late as he did. There were people campaigning far before him, and nobody grabbed like me or like anyone really. You had Kokesh, you had Mahora, Kim Ruff was in at one point. You had all these different people, many of which ended up dropping out early on, which was kind of funny. But even before Hornberger entered, there were already people dropping. But I don't know, that was just nature of politics, I guess. Something funny about that. I don't know. And come in and just do as well as he did. That part can be analyzed. It's a story of Icarus flying too close to the sun. I think that's the only way to look at it. Fly too close to the sun and you burn up and you fall. Anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I could really say about the campaign, just looking back. Oh, man. Yeah. Either way, I'm excited to see where things go in the future. It seems like Dave Smith has expressed some interest, and, Spike Cohen as well. Personally, I think Justin Amash should run for governor of Michigan, but that doesn't appear to be happening, so hopefully Michigan doesn't get Whitmer back. But with that, everything evolved just right. And the caucus grew tremendously. So yeah, I think that's all I could really say. And man, it'll be interesting to see what's in store. So with that, go check out Cypherpunk Scribe on Twitter, and check out the Libertarian Frontier on TeePublic. And for those, I gotta think of a sign-off thing. I don't know, I gotta start doing this show more. I got the graphics up and running finally, so we'll see where things go in the future. Smith Malice 24, find it on the TeePublic store. Libertarian Frontier, once again. And with that, I will bid you all adieu.